Well, thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Christine Bryn. I am an associate curator at the North Carolina Maritime Museum, and I get to do all the weird and fantastical programs, which is awesome. But this one is definitely what holds a special place in my heart, because at the Maritime Museum in Beaufort, one of our iconic pieces or best known pieces is we are home to the Queen Anne's Revenge Blackbeard's flagship. So I spend a lot of time talking about pirates and the golden age of piracy and a lot of male pirates. So this is my chance to give the ladies their voice. I love studying women's history. I love looking at women's history. One of the challenges you have when you're studying women's history, though, is finding their voices in the history. Often you're having to look through kind of look through men's history to find it. Because I have a great quote that actually inspired this presentation in a lot of ways. This is a professor Professor Laurel that said, "Well-behaved women rarely make history." So the woman that is following all the rules go largely forgotten. So when you're studying women's history, the way that we find out what is going on and how they were living their lives is we have to take a look, not at, unfortunately, the way I learn about the well-behaved lady or what was going on is by looking at those misbehaving women. Those are the ones that we find in history. And they give us insights not only into their life, but the world that they existed in and the world that the well-behaved women also existed in. So this is a great opportunity to learn not just about these ladies, but also about the world they lived in and the other women that might have been around them and the opportunities they had. That being said, they also have an amazing story. So we're going to be talking today specifically about Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Now, the story that these two ladies have is one that daytime soap operas wish they could put together. This is an example of how truth is so much more fascinating than history. Now, I tell you, actually, we're going to be talking about 4 women today because, give you a little bit of context, 1696, King William came out with a proclamation. This proclamation is very important to the world because it is about piracy. And essentially what King William says is that to be considered a pirate, you don't actually have to participate in piracy at all. All you have to do is aid and abet a pirate. So if you let a pirate come and stay at your home, you are now a pirate. If you buy their materials off of them, you are now a pirate. And by that justification, we get to talk about not just 2 pirates, but actually 4, because we will also be talking about their mothers. And by context there, the mothers would be pirates because they definitely helped aid and abet those women. They helped make them what they are, what we come to know. What's really exciting about studying these 2 pirates is these are 2 of the few pirates that we actually have such an extensive backstory on. Pirates such as Blackbeard, even as much as we know about him, we don't even know what his name is or where he was actually born. Historians still differ and argue over where he was from and what his actual name was. These 2 ladies, we have such an extensive story that includes, in one case, even the name of her mother. We know the name of their fathers, and we know the drama that led up to their births and ultimately their life as pirates. And we're going to get to talk about that today with all the scandal that's involved that goes along with it. So, like I said, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and we're going to start with their mothers because that is their origin. So we have the 2 moms. We have Mary Brennan, who will have her start in Ireland. And then we have Mother Read. Unfortunately, Mary Read's mother's name has been lost to history. She was a pretty well-behaved lady for most of her life, unfortunately, so nobody wrote down her name. Except for when, at the very end, when she's associated with her daughter, that she ultimately does start misbehaving and gets recorded. Mary Brennan, on the other hand, pretty wicked woman. We're going to get to learn about her. So Mary Brennan is going to be, so I used to put these maps up and not explain them, and then I had someone ask me about my War Shark ink blots. So this is Ireland. That's where we're going to be talking about Mary Brennan, and then ultimately Anne Bonny. And then this is England, obviously, with Mother Read, and then later Mary Read will be from there. So we're starting here with Mother Reed out of England. Like I said, Mother Reed was a fairly well-behaved lady for most of her life. So unfortunately, that leads us to not have much about her early history. What we do know is that Mother Reed obviously was living in England. She was married to a mariner, lived a very high, up and up life, was very well behaved, relatively speaking. And because what happens is at one point her husband goes off to sea. And as mariners are apt to do, he doesn't return. He is lost at sea. Shortly after leaving for sea, she discovers that she is with child. She's pregnant with her husband's child, presumably her husband's, and gives birth to a baby boy. Now this is all well and acceptable to society. She's a widow of a mariner with a son. Well, quite a while after her husband leaves, she discovers she's pregnant again, and her husband has been gone for quite a while. So obviously, quite a bit of scandal right there. So she finds herself in this difficult situation and actually elects to go out to the country and stay with some friends to conceal her situation. Because at this point, she is still being supported by her husband's family. And they obviously would not be very happy to find out that she was having somebody else's child. Well, she goes out into the country and gives birth to a little girl who she will name Mary Reed. This is our future little pirate right here. Isn't she cute? No. Obviously not pictures from the time period. Unfortunately, about the time that Mary is born, her brother passes away. Oh, so there they are, they're living out in the country, the two of them. Yep. Her brother passes away. Now when her brother passes away, this becomes a problem for the mother because obviously she's being supported by her husband's family, and if they find out, one, she had a bastard child by another man, and two, that their grandson is no longer around, that's the end of all the support that they're gonna get. So the mother has a thought, and she decides what she's gonna do, since she no longer has the son, is she's gonna take her daughter Mary, who is now starting to grow up, and dress her up as her son. She raises her son up, brings her actually into the city, and presents her daughter's son, Mary, to the grandmother, to her husband's mother, and says, here's your grandson that you so love and dote on and haven't seen since we've been in the country. Could you continue to support us? She agrees initially. The grandmother goes, oh, I'll take him on. I will raise him up. And she goes, no, I love him too much. You couldn't possibly take him from me. So the grandmother agrees to support them, and Mary grows up as a young boy. Now, this deceit is so successful that in the one source I have about it, we actually have a line in there where when Mary comes of reason, I guess grows up a little bit later, her mother actually has to explain to her she's not a boy, and explain you're actually a girl, and explain that whole situation. So very, very effective way of deception. Now, unfortunately, the grandmother does ultimately pass away, and there is no inheritance, I guess, so the support does dry up. Mary will continue her life. At that point, she is growing up. She's about 1708 or so. She's now almost fully grown, continuing to live her life as a boy. This is all she has known at this point. Mary's mother, starts putting him out and having him work as a servant. Now, unfortunately, he goes the same way as all teenage boys. He is bored as a servant. So what would a teenage boy at the time do when he gets bored? He joins the army. So Mary went out and joined the Continental Army, and while she is in the army, she comes by a unique problem. She falls in love. She falls in love with what's supposed to be her tent mate. Do you want to sit up here with me? Okay, you can sit up here. So, she falls in love with what is her tent mate at the time. Now, obviously, her tent mate has no idea she's a woman. He keeps going into battles, and despite the fact that Mary is not actually scheduled to go into those battles or fight those fights, she still throws herself in there to help protect the man that she loves, who obviously is completely clueless, thinks he's got himself quite a buddy. Go ahead and take a seat in that chair. Thinks he's got himself quite a buddy here. After quite a while, she does ultimately come out in one night in the tent and mistakenly exposes her breasts to him, at which point they are described as glowing because understandably they've been wrapped her whole life, they're quite pale. So he is excited because he has himself his very own lover, and he doesn't have to share her like he would any of the other camp followers. And interestingly, despite the fact that she lives the life that she lives, she goes, no, you gotta put a ring on it. I'm a fine, upstanding lady, and surprisingly, he agrees. So they end up leaving the military, the army, and getting married. They say that the wedding became kind of the go-to thing, like the must-go-to ceremony for all of the soldiers, because here you have two guys that one ended up being a woman, and it was quite a thing. So all of the guys started pulling their money to buy gifts and go to the wedding to meet and see Mary in her true form as a woman. Ultimately, Mary and her husband, who they don't actually record what his name was, but her soldier, get together, and they end up opening a tavern called the Three Horseshoes for the military specifically to come to. She lives her life for the first time at this point as a woman, supposedly wearing those dresses and everything, which had to be a huge change for her. This would be a great place to end the story, great happy ending, but we wouldn't be here if it was a happy ending. So unfortunately, shortly after that, her husband dies. After he passes away, there is peace in England. The military and army starts to shrink down. Their primary patronage was from the military at that point, so their tavern ends up going under as well. Well, what is Mary to do? She's now a woman trying to live in a man's world with limited options. So she puts the pants back on. She returns to her life as a man, but she can't go into the army because now they know who she is. So instead of going into the army, she becomes a merchant. She joins the Navy, goes out onto the waters. She gets onto a ship that is heading down to the, I think it was the West Indies at the time. On her very first voyage, they get captured by pirates. Yep, there's the West Indies. Sorry, skipping ahead of myself. They get captured by pirates. Now the crew is an English crew of pirates, so they see her, they realize she is identified as an Englishman. At that point, they beg her to join their crew and say, come with us. She joins their crew, and that is the beginning of the infamous pirate, Mary Read. She is now on the crew of the pirate, Jack Rackham, also known as Calico Jack. I love talking about Jack Rackham because, as I mentioned earlier, when studying women's history, often the best place to find information about women is in the footnotes of men's history. In this case, he is very much a footnote to the ladies. Jack Rackham probably is best known for having those female pirates because he will ultimately have both Anne Bonny and Mary Read on his crew. He has a fairly successful pirating career. His biggest take was, I think, 3 fishing nets and 2 fishing poles a couple times. So not really that successful until the ladies start joining his crew. So this is awesome to have. And then we're going to talk more about him in a little bit and his apparently he was a very attractive man, and I'm not so sure about that, but that's to each their own. So we're going to get off of Mary Read for right now because, like I said, we're going to be talking about Anne Bonny. So we're going to circle back to Mary Read and Jack Rackham, leave them out there on the sea together. So Mary Brennan here is a maid in Ireland, specifically in Cork, Ireland, and she is a maid in the household of a lawyer named McCormick. Now, McCormick's wife ultimately has a child and she becomes ill following the birth of her child. So the doctors recommend that she go out to the country to recover. So she goes out to the country to stay with her mother-in-law while she recovers from the birth of their child, leaving Mary Brennan in charge of the household with her husband, with her husband as well, which was a big mistake, as we'll see. So she is, initially Mary Brennan is being courted by, they'll only ever refer to him as the tanner. So this tanner comes around and he's courting her, and she brings him into the household, and one day, he steals 3 silver spoons out of the kitchen of the house. Mary, being a good maid and very well aware of her surroundings, soon after he leaves with the silver spoons, realizes they are missing and connects the dots pretty quickly as to who has taken them. She confronts him. He denies it vehemently. He did not take them, does not want to get caught with that. And what he does is he comes back later to the household and he takes the spoons and hides them in her bed underneath her blankets, figuring she'll find them that night and everybody will have a good laugh. And he said it was only ever meant to be a prank. And he's like, she'll find them for sure tonight when she goes to bed. What he doesn't realize is she's not sleeping in her bed. She's sleeping in McCormick's bed with McCormick. So it goes nights, weeks even, without her discovering those spoons because she's not sleeping in that bed. She continues, she's got the constable now looking for the tanner to arrest him because he's stolen these spoons. He knows he left those spoons in her room, and he thinks that what she's doing is she's actually trying to keep the spoons for herself and frame him as the thief. So in the middle of all this, the wife comes home. And she brings with her mother-in-law, but we'll get to that one in a bit. So the wife comes home, one of the first things there's the mother-in-law. So one of the first things the tanner does is he comes and he meets with the wife. He says, she stole the spoons. I did not steal the spoons. He tells her exactly where to find the spoons. Sure enough, she goes into the room and there are the spoons just like he told her. The wife, being a wily one and probably a little suspicious already, connects the dots as to why her servant has not found the spoons. So she devises a plan. She tells the tanner, go on home. We're not going to be seeking you out. I know you're innocent, relatively speaking, in all of this. So ultimately, what she does is she calls her servant in. Now, Mary has no idea what is going on. She says, what I want to do, she said, my mother-in-law is coming to visit. She's going to sleep in the best bed of the household, which is my bed. I need a place to sleep, so I would like to sleep in your bed. Please go change the sheets on your bed because I don't want to sleep in your filth. So she goes and changes the sheets. At that point, the servant Mary does find those spoons, puts them into her trunk, figuring she can put them back into the cabinet, not aware that the wife is aware about the spoons, and thinking that the situation is resolved. So she puts the spoons into her trunk. The husband, in the meantime, is away on a business trip. He's not due to come back until the next day. So that night, Mary goes and sleeps, I don't know where, but not in her bed, again. The wife sleeps in her bed, and her mother-in-law sleeps in the main bed. So the husband sneaks home that night with intentions of having one last tryst before the wife comes home. He goes to Mary's bed and sleeps with the woman that's in that bed, who is not Mary. It is in fact his wife. But she is so appalled and so astounded, she doesn't reveal herself to be his wife. But she now has irrefutable evidence that he has been sleeping around. He actually leaves that right before dawn, goes outside the door, comes back in, I'm home, thinking nobody is the wiser. So, at that point, the wife is so enraged that she calls the constable, accuses Mary of having stolen the spoons. They come in and search her room, and sure enough, they're in her trunk, irrefutable evidence that she stole them right there. Plus, they have a witness, the tanner, telling everybody that she stole it. Now we have also, the wife is also obviously quite upset because the husband has slept when sleeping around. So she ends up leaving the husband, kicking him out, and her mother-in-law is on her side. Yay, mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law in this whole scenario holds the purse strings, apparently. Even though he is a lawyer, he still depends very much on that family money, and that'll come in later. So we've got now, unfortunately, Mary Brennan goes into jail, and while she is in jail, she discovers that she is pregnant, presumably with McCormick's son or child. So she finds out she is pregnant while she is in jail. Takes quite a while for her court date to come around. When her court date does come around, her case gets thrown out because the person bringing charges against her, the wife of McCormick, drops all charges. Because while she is in jail and pregnant, the wife discovers that she is also pregnant. Now, this gets twisted a little bit because the husband finds out she is pregnant and leaves her because he has not slept with his wife in months. So how could she be pregnant with his child? He came home and slept with Mary, not her. So she goes and officially moves in with the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law then takes, obviously, her side in all of this, and ultimately will agree, yeah, like I said, she holds the purse strings. Ultimately, she will agree to give the son a little bit of an allowance to help support him, even though him and his wife are no longer living together. Kristen, why don't you go sit with Daddy? Take those with you. You take those with you. Go sit with Daddy. Yeah, go sit with Daddy. Go sit with Daddy. So ultimately, she will give him an allowance to help support him. In the meantime, Mary is free. And she gives birth about 1698. We think Anne was about 1696 or so within a couple years. Anne is 1698. I'm sorry, Mary we think was 1696. But she gives birth to Anne Bonny, our soon-to-be pirate lady, in 1698. Now, at that point, interestingly, McCormick is very much apparently genuinely in love with her. So even though he's separated from his wife, he brings Mary Brennan post-jail back into his household. They tell the world that she's coming in as the maid, but she apparently presents herself very much as the lady of the household. But the challenge he has is that he knows his mother would never stand for him having his bastard child in the house or raising her up. So what's he do? He takes his child and dresses her as a boy and presents her as a distant relative. He tells the world, this is a distant relative's son. I'm just raising him up in my household. Nothing suspicious here. Unfortunately, he didn't think out this plan because the people that were most suspicious was his mother, who knew he had no male relatives with young sons, and his wife, the people that would be the most intimately aware of his family. So ultimately, he is living with Mary Brennan. He has this little boy living in his house. They have a mutual friend that comes over to the house, realizes pretty quickly that Mary Brennan is not acting as the maid, but in fact as the wife or lady of the house, and that this is not the little boy, this is in fact their child, Anne. Obviously, this can't stand well. The mother-in-law becomes quite upset. I keep jumping ahead. Yeah, there's the friend whispering the truth. Mother-in-law becomes quite upset and she cuts him off completely financially. She can't stand for it. She's not supporting their two. So, Mary Brennan and William McCormick are stuck with a problem as well. William is an attorney in the area. He's now been in a scandalous affair. Nobody wants to hire him because he's been dishonored in a way. So he decides to do, he decides to do something that a lot of the people in that area are going to do. And he comes to America. He's going to start a new life. Now, about the time he decides to leave Ireland, either right before or right after, unfortunately, Mary Brennan dies. They never say what causes her death, but she does die. That leaves William McCormick with Anne being quite a boy and being raised very untraditionally. So he decides he's going to take his family which is at that point just Anne, and they move to Charlestown, South Carolina, to start a new life. He sees the opportunity to be a wealthy merchantman, does end up being very successful at it. While they are there, he requires his daughter to then raise up as a girl. He tries to raise her at this point as a fine young woman. What he doesn't take into account is her formative years were quite free and quite wild, so she ends up never quite fitting the mold of the sweet young woman. We see quite a few interesting stories. At one point, there is a story of Anne getting so enraged with a servant that she takes the butter knife and stabs him. She has a suitor that tries to rape her to force her into marriage. She also stabs him into the heart. So as you can see, fiery young lady with a good Irish spirit there, and she is not having it. She is not going to be that fine young lady. She starts hanging around the taverns, hanging around the marina, and she finds a young man that she ends up falling in love with, or so she claims. She falls in love with this young man. Her father does not approve because he's concerned that sailor is only out for inheritance. He says, I'm not gonna, so if you marry him, I'm cutting you off completely. He's not gonna want you if you don't have any money. She goes, no, Father, we love each other. I don't know. I can only imagine what it looked like. But Father, we love each other, and he loves me for me. We're getting married anyway. Now, mind you, I do want to point out, I did change it to William Cormac. When he came to America, he changed his name to Cormac and not McCormick. So it was McCormick when he was in Ireland. That wasn't a typo. I meant to mention that. So they are now married, her and her sailor friend. He does go through with it. He calls her bluff. He cuts them off completely. And she decides, because she is now married to the sailor, she's going to go to sea with him. Sees nothing wrong with this. This is a logical jump for her. They go off to sea. They find themselves, I think, down in the West Indies area. She is working at that point in a variety of different versions of the history, different historians and different tales. It appears that she was working in probably a tavern, and she's meeting a variety of men. She is not a well-behaved woman by any means. At one point, her now husband actually surprises her in a hammock with another man, finds her sleeping and so innocently with another man. But while she is working at the tavern, she meets a pirate that she just can't resist. Once again, our very attractive Jack Rackham, also known as Calico Jack for the fancy clothes that he loved to wear. Now, Jack Rackham here must have been, like I said, quite the attractive man. I mean, take a look at that nose. Tell me that doesn't just do me right here. And this is an etching of what he would have looked like. So she meets Jack Rackham, and she falls madly in love with him or his lifestyle. But either way, Jack Rackham ultimately will go to her husband, offers to buy her out of her marriage. I know that one's a little uncomfortable, but offers to buy her out of her marriage, ultimately does get her, and she joins his crew as a pirate. And Anne Bonny, the pirate, is born now. So Anne Bonny joins her crew. While she is with him, shortly after joining his crew, she will discover that she is in fact pregnant. She will spend most of her pregnancy on the ship before being put to shore in Cuba, where she will stay with some friends, and she will give birth. They never actually, different sources say different genders as far as the baby goes, but it is pretty firm that she did have a baby. Now this is important because later on in the trial documents, she will try to say that she was forced into piracy. She never elected to go to this lifestyle. But here we have a very clear example of an opportunity to leave the lifestyle, and she leaves her son with the friend, or her child, with the friends, and then goes back to sea with Jack Rackham ultimately. So that doesn't bode well for her plea of, I got forced into it. Now, she is on the crew. Anne Bonny joins Jack Rackham's crew first, and ultimately a new pirate will join their crew, a young man that we know is Mary Read, but is portrayed as presenting as a man, so obviously they do not know that is a man. Anne Bonny, being the misbehaving woman that she is, sees this attractive young man to join her crew and sees an opportunity for a little bit of extra loving. Starts flirting with this guy, starts really laying it on, and then finally Mary Read has to reveal her secret. She goes, I'm not interested, I'm sorry, and ends up saying, you know, I too am a woman. And Anne Bonny was understandably quite taken to find another female pirate on the crew. So these two, initially she's flirting with them, Anne's flirting with Mary very heavily, and then after she finds out she's a woman, they end up hanging out a lot more, talking and getting acquainted. Now, Anne did promise not to give away Mary's secret because it could be very dangerous for a woman in a pirating world or in a mariner's world at that time. So right now, like I said, Jack Rackham is in love with Anne Bonny. Anne Bonny was flirting and connecting with Mary Read. She finds out the truth about Mary Read. Poor Jack Rackham has no idea what the truth is. All he thinks is that his girl is cheating on him. So he becomes enraged and ready to start dueling this woman, ultimately, or pirate, and ultimately Anne did have to give up the secret. And I can't even imagine Jack's reaction when he figures out that he had not one female pirate, but two on his crew. I mean, you gotta start to wonder about the rest of his crew. I wonder if he like started looking at the rest of them like, who else here? So ultimately we have Anne Bonny is with Jack Rackham. Mary Read will ultimately take a lover on her ship amongst the crew. Later on during the trial, they do ask her the name of what she refers to as her common law husband. She will never reveal which one is her husband, because for her to reveal in the trial which one is her husband would be an automatic death sentence for him, because like I said, that 1696 proclamation, anyone who aids or supports a pirate is by default a pirate. And presumably her husband was able to plead that he was forced into the lifestyle. But if she were able to say he was my lover, that would be a death sentence. So she holds her tongue and never reveals who he is. But she definitely dominated the relationship, because one of the best stories that I found about Mary Read is that her husband will go to shore on leave at one point, and he will insult somebody and end up getting challenged to a duel. She knows her husband is a horrible duelist. So what she does is she takes herself to the shore, finds that person, purposely offends him, and challenges him to a duel before her husband's duel. She goes up to him and takes one shot and kills him on the spot. I do have both of these paintings portrayals here. It was supposed to be a gun duel, but these are pretty dramatic and interesting. So you can see she was, and I imagine the guy that she was dueling probably had no idea she was a woman, hence the dramatic reveal of her breasts while she's, because that's what everybody does after they shoot somebody. Is they just like, check, I'm gonna strip down now. But she presumably saves her husband from that poor dueling habit right there. So they both have their lovers. And they do go pirating. They are considered the fiercest pirates on the ocean. Their own crew describes them as cursing worse than any pirate they've ever known and being some of the fiercest fighters. They do ultimately, in November of 1720, this is a portrait painting of Blackbeard getting captured. Yes, nobody has painted Anne Bonny and Mary Read getting captured yet. I will find it someday. I will talk an artist into it. But they get captured in November 1720 in that final battle where they are being attacked. Their crew the night before, and presumably them, had been drinking quite heavily in celebration of a recent victory. That crew was quite hungover that next morning when they were being attacked. They would not come up from below decks because they did not want to die. They thought it better to be captured. Our ladies here were so fiercely upset with their own crew, screaming into the hold, come up here, you cowardly dogs. At one point they are documented as shooting their guns into the hold at their own crew, trying to get them to come up and defend themselves. To last no avail. They do get captured, like I said, November 1720. The whole crew gets captured. and they were ultimately found guilty of piracy, and they would be sentenced to be hanged. Yeah, it's the best portrayal I had of a court trial of pirates. Nobody had, nobody took pictures there. But they would be found guilty because, like I said, that is the point where you're seeing that 1696 proclamation again. You don't necessarily need to have done any pirating, you just needed to have aided them. Presumably, there must have been somebody that was found innocent because Mary Read continued to hold her tongue at this point, not implicating what would have been her husband, who she considered. Now, after this trial, we have Anne Bonny is given one last chance to see her sweet husband, Rackham, and she has one of my favorite quotes. There have actually been t-shirts out there, which is supposed to be the final words to her sweet, sweet husband, is that she was sorry to see him there, but if he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog. You can feel the sympathy and the heartbreak, right? Ultimately, when Mary Read also does not go without an awesome quote. During the trial, she is asked why she would take to a life of piracy, knowing the risks that it would protect, that even men would have, much less a woman. And her great quote is, "As to hanging, she thought it no great hardship, for were it not for that, every cowardly fellow would turn to pirate, and so infest the sea that men of courage must starve." So she felt like hanging was a great way to weed out the weak and keep them off the sea. So yeah, you could tell, really, really sweet women in these roles right here. They would be tried separately from the rest of the crew due to their gender. At their trial, they would both plead their bellies. They would be discovered to be pregnant, presumably with their husband's children, but we've learned Anne Bonny not that well behaved, so there's no saying. But they were both documented as being pregnant, so their sentences would be stayed because they obviously don't want to kill a innocent, and they were meant to be stayed until the birth of the children. Unfortunately, as far as history goes, that's the last we hear about them. We do know that there is a record later on for Mary Read saying that she was buried in a pauper's grave on April 28, 1721. There is no record as to whether she had the child, though you can find quite a few women claiming they are descended from her. And she would have been, interestingly, 26 years old at that time. So that whole story, she did all of that in her 26 years. Now, Anne Bonny, on the other hand, like I said, a couple years younger, would have been 22 years old at the trial. There is no actual records past the trial and her pleading her belly, but there is a historian, David Cordingley, who has been in contact with a family out of Charleston that say that they were actually, and that he's seen the documentation. Unfortunately, it's private, so I don't get to see it, but Cordingley I trust. They claim that what happened is Anne Bonny's wealthy merchant father heard she was in jail and ultimately came, got her out of the jail, brought her back to Charleston, where she ended up marrying a suitor of her father's choice and living out her life, having something, I think it was like 10 children for him, and dying in April 25th, 1782 at about the age of 84 years old. So she may have come back. It sounds like she probably did, I believe, accordingly, though I don't get to see the documents as much as I'm jonesing to see them. But that is the story of Anne Bonny and Mary Read. These are some of the resources that I used if you ever want to read up on them a little bit. The main source of Golden Age of Pirates and Anne Bonny and Mary Read is the story General History of Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson. If you ever want to take a look at Golden Age Pirates, that's a great resource right there. But thank you very much for joining me today.